My mother was the villainous female supporting role, and by the time I was born, the story had already reached its conclusion. Once, she was a young lady living in a world of luxury and indulgence, surrounded by extravagance and pleasure. But now, she had become the person everyone despised. A street rat everyone wanted to crush. She had been betrayed by the male protagonist, and her family had gone bankrupt. A rich young lady who knew nothing, for my sake, had to start from scratch and learn everything anew. Chapter 1. I heard from the nurse auntie that when my mother gave birth to me, she had no idea she was pregnant. She only knew that she had gained a lot of weight. It wasn't until she was notified of her bankruptcy that day, when all her bank cards were frozen, and the only money she had left was 20,000 yuan. That money was a New Year's gift from a distant relative when she was a child, and she had always thought it was too little, so she never touched it. Looking at the 20,000 yuan that was left, she suddenly felt a stomachache, which brought her to the hospital. And then, she gave birth to me. When I was born, my mom insisted on staying in a VIP room and said she didn't want to go to the ordinary delivery room. So, her balance was reduced by a zero, leaving her with only 2,000 yuan. I came very suddenly. When my mom first saw me, she acted like a fool. She was too shocked. She had never thought about having a child. Not even when she loved her father the most did she consider it, because she needed so much love, and that love could only be given by her father, and only to her. They had sworn such an oath when they were very young. Jeremy's love can only be given to Freya, when they were just growing up. It was indeed like that. Her father's love was given only to her. At 18, Jeremy told her, "I like you, only you." He fulfilled the childhood oath, and everyone knew that Jeremy belonged to Freya. Whenever mom was controlling dad, those who knew them always teased, "The young lady's possessiveness is so strong." At 18, Jeremy felt sweetness under her possessiveness, like a lollipop with a green apple flavor. The sweetness slowly melted in his heart. Blushing, he said goodbye to his friends and turned to run toward his own happiness. At 24, Jeremy felt nothing but suppression under her possessiveness. It was like a poorly mixed sour and sweet dip. You couldn't spit it out, and holding it in your mouth only left endless pain. His friends mocked him for being henpecked. Every time he heard the urgent ring of his phone, his heart sank. If the suppressed emotions couldn't find an outlet, the heart would open a window to another direction. So, he chose to slack off and fell for another woman. He knew he had betrayed Freya, so he kept it a secret. At first, the guilt tipped the scales, but as the pleasure from his diversion increased, the balance shifted in the other direction. When all the lies crumbled, it got very messy. They cursed and fought, turning their home into anything but a home. In the end, they swore to never have any contact again. Last month, they had just gotten divorced. As the villainous female supporting role, mom was extremely paranoid. Once dad didn't show enough love, she started to become suspicious. 3 fixed phone calls every day. The clothes she wore had to be chosen by mom. She had to be home before 7 every night, even though she guarded against it every day. Dad, in the end, was like a handful of sand, blown by the wind into another woman's arms. It started with chestnut-colored hair on his coat, followed by an unfamiliar perfume scent on his collar. At the beginning of the argument, mom bluntly told him, "You smell bad." It was a very cheap scent, sweet enough to make one dizzy. Dad, to cover up his guilt, took off his coat and nonchalantly said, "I just went to the mall, probably bumped into someone." Later, there was an unknown woman's accessory. The housekeeper found a silk scarf in dad's pocket. The housekeeper asked, and mom realized it didn't belong to her. Then, at night, there was the deliberate turning of his back when they slept, the way his eyes wandered when they hugged. Mom couldn't ignore these changes, so she hired some private detectives to investigate dad's whereabouts. When those photos came through, mom almost couldn't believe it. He had cheated with the person she hated the most. Perhaps it was the villainous female supporting role's instinct. The first time she saw this woman, she instinctively hated her. The woman had a face that was the complete opposite of hers. In those photos, the good husband that others saw, the one who once loved her the most, during his working hours, he was holding hands and hugging this woman. oblivious to the world. The two seemed so familiar, as though they had been together for many years. Just a year ago, Dad had spoken ill of this person with her late at night. They both agreed that this woman was a seasoned, pretentious coquette. Now, ironically, this woman had become her husband's lover. She had become the third party in their marriage. Chapter 2. Mom tried to talk to her husband to save their marriage, but she was rejected. The second time, Mom specifically went to her company to confront her. After a long wait, she finally saw her, but she was holding her husband's arm. When Dad saw Mom, he immediately shielded the woman behind him. This scene made Mom laugh. She said, "Jeremy, aren't you going to explain?" Dad didn't respond to Mom's question. Instead, he turned to the woman, said a few words, and asked her to leave first. After the woman left, Dad tried to come over and take Mom's hand. He didn't argue or deny it. He just kept saying sorry. Sorry. He slapped himself while speaking. Then, he directly kneeled, begging her not to divorce him. Mom was silent for a long time before turning and going into the room. He thought that Mom would choose to divorce him early the next morning. Unexpectedly, Mom forgave him. She said she wouldn't divorce him, but he had to promise to cut off all contact with that woman. Then the situation completely reversed. The woman came to find Mom. Mom refused her several times, but eventually, she came to our house to confront Dad. When Dad saw his lover in such a pathetic state, he endured the pain in his heart. He left with her. A month later, he returned home. The sky was overcast and it rained heavily. Jeremy, dripping wet, pushed open the door. When she thought her cheating husband finally realized her worth and was willing to come back home, she was slapped in the face with a stack of photos, and the sharp corners of the photos scratched her face. It was then that she woke up from her dream. This person wasn't here to reconcile. He was here to accuse her. "Freya, you're becoming more and more disgusting. When I see your face now, I feel sick. How could you be so vicious? You knew how important this banquet was to Serafina, yet you had people exclude her. Do you know how many late nights she stayed up for this banquet? Are you even human? Can't you just let others be happy?" Mom was stunned. She hadn't expected her longtime companion, for the sake of an outsider, to be this angry at her. Instantly, her grievances exploded. "Yes, I can't stand her doing well. Why should a woman who destroys other people's families be able to get better and better? Why don't you ask me? How many nights have I cried for you? How many sleepless nights have I endured for your career? Why should she get everything? What right does she have? You tell me." She nearly screamed, then collapsed, grabbing her hair and bending over as she broke down in tears. The cold rainwater on him fell straight into the back of her collar. It extinguished all the warmth within her. Jeremy just coldly watched her. He thought, this scene felt so familiar. When she cried like this before, he would feel heartbroken. Now, he suddenly realized that all he wanted was to escape from here. "So," he said, "let's divorce." Mom's mind went blank, and she slapped him hard on the left side of his face. Jeremy was stunned by the slap. "Divorce? You can still say that? Isn't all this our fault? I don't understand. Every couple who faces problems tries to solve them. But you chose to solve me. You chose to cheat." Dad was furious. They'd never been good at holding back from each other since childhood. So, he pushed her to the mirror. "Then what about you? Have you ever looked at yourself?" They both stared at the woman in the mirror. Her hair was disheveled. There was a long scratch on her side face. Her eyes were red and dull. The sadness and anger on her face hadn't faded. She stared at herself in confusion. She remembered the first time they looked into this mirror when they got married. They were both smiling. Now, one face was filled with disgust, the other with anger. She suddenly felt that debating whether or not to divorce was meaningless. The love was gone, and she didn't need anyone to live her life. When they signed the divorce agreement, Mom looked at the signed papers over and over again. Someone beside her asked if there was a problem. She said, "After so many years, we should at least say goodbye properly." Then, she picked up the papers, stood up exhausted, and said, "I hope we never meet again." Chapter 3. Unexpectedly. A month later, my mom's family went bankrupt. She found out just as she was preparing to move. The house was jointly owned by both of them, but there was no longer any reason to stay there. She drove back home, but it was just an empty house now. She had never imagined that, under these circumstances, she would have a child. She lost everything but gained a child. This child was like a fast-forward button, making her life split in an instant. Though everything happened so suddenly, she still accepted the change of having me. Then she realized she couldn't even take care of her own daily needs, let alone a child. She didn't know it cost 12 yuan to take a taxi from her house to the hospital. She didn't realize how expensive the food she used to eat was, the casual meal she used to pick. Now, she couldn't even afford the change. She still kept her old spending habits, wanting the best of everything. She was forced to learn how to take care of herself, and she was forced to learn how to take care of me. She had never thought about having a child, but she seemed to really like me. She always held me, gently rubbed my little face, and held my little hand. She spoke softly to me. When the nurse took care of me, she watched from the side, awkwardly trying to learn. She deleted all the mindless novels on her phone and replaced them with parenting guides. However, she often fell asleep while reading them. I loved staring at my mom's sleeping face. When she was asleep, she looked like a rose blooming outside the window, gently swaying in the wind, quiet and beautiful. Every time I fell asleep, my mom would gently pat me. She softly asked the nurse what kind of formula would be suitable for a baby like me. The nurse quietly suggested trying XX's formula, saying that my baby was small and skinny, likely not well nourished in the womb. Mom hesitated as she looked at the expensive price and at me, bubbling in the cradle. In the end, she gritted her teeth and bought a box. Afterward, her balance was reduced by another 0, leaving her with only 200 yuan. Although I was well taken care of in the hospital, I was always extremely sleepy, and chest tightness was a common issue. Mom didn't notice anything unusual with me. She said I was a little rose, always sleeping 24 hours a day. The nurse performed a full-body checkup on me. The doctor said I had congenital heart disease and was unlikely to live to adulthood. In those first few days after the diagnosis, Mom cried while holding me. She hadn't even finished her postpartum confinement, and the doctor advised her to cry less. Then, he asked who my father was. Mom cried and couldn't answer. It felt like her life had been suddenly cut apart. The first 20 years of her life were spent in luxury, unaware of the realities of the world. Fate had let her live so comfortably, leaving her unprepared to become a mother. It seemed that fate, as if it thought she wasn't suffering enough, struck her again. The nurse auntie looked displeased, saying, "How did such a good girl end up marrying someone like that? Some things, you just have to let go of. In the face of life and death, so many things don't matter." The nurse gently comforted her, patting her back. They even brought in a psychologist to prevent her from suffering from postpartum depression. The nurse auntie often looked at me and sighed. She said, at first, she didn't like Mom, thinking she was too unmotherly. Later, she began to sympathize with Mom, because Mom looked like a newly bloomed flower bud, so fragile that even the slightest wind or rain could make her fall from the branch. People like her, she encountered several times a year. Perhaps I was too obedient, too cute. When she looked at me, she just wanted to take care of me more, unwilling to let me become an orphan. But no matter how much others sympathized with me, the high medical bills still overwhelmed Mom. In the past, she had gone mad for an irretrievable relationship, doing all kinds of face-losing things, humbling herself to please, constantly using her own wealth to pay, pouring red wine on the female lead in public, and sabotaging the female lead's career. Since childhood, what she seemed to long for was for someone to help her when she fell, not to laugh at her. But, from childhood to adulthood, only Jeremy ever did that. Her parents, exhausted in their own marriage, had no energy to raise a child. So, she grew up willful, rude, arrogant, and spoiled, with no one to discipline her. They only knelt before her identity and status, without those things as a disguise. She was like a flower bud on a branch, just a little wind and rain could make her wither. She clearly understood all of this, but she didn't know how to do things right. She had always wanted what she never got, trying to grasp a little love in her own way. In the end, she grasped nothing. She only wanted to hold on to that fragile love, the one that could scatter with the wind. After taking several deep breaths, she began to ask her so-called close friends for money, but the phone was either busy or filled with insults. When she made the last call, she hesitated for a long time. The other side answered. "Who is it?" "It's Mary. I thought it was someone important." "So, it's Freya, the young lady," came the mocking tone. "What can I do for you?" "I need to borrow money." "How much can I borrow?" Mom told her the amount, but before she could finish, the other side scoffed. "Aren't you the young lady? You can just wave your hand and get millions. Why are you borrowing a few thousand from us little people?" "I have the money, but with your current situation, you'll never be able to pay me back. How about this? You can bark like a dog a few times, and maybe I'll feel sorry for you and lend you the money." Chapter 4. After the person finished speaking, the phone was filled with a burst of laughter. Not only did they mock her, but they also wanted everyone to know that now anyone could make fun of her. But this time, Mom didn't hang up the phone as quickly as usual. She asked, "Was I ever not good to you?" The laughter on the other end suddenly went cold. "Yes, you were good to me, but everything you did was because you owed me. Who told you to be born into wealth? To have the kind of fortune that would take me several lifetimes to achieve? I used to wish for your downfall. Now that you're down, I'm so happy. I'm celebrating with them right now. Celebrating your misfortune, because the world now has one more person like us." Mom didn't hear the rest of the words. She slowly sat down in front of me with the phone in hand, gently stroking my blanket. She thought about what the people around her used to be like. As a young lady, even though she was so difficult, there were countless people around her who would flatter her. Some would clumsily fawn over her. Some would subtly show their goodwill, and some would slowly, without rush, become her closest circle. Mary was her favorite friend, because Mary always cared about her, and didn't indulge all her behaviors. She treated herself and everyone equally. She would scorn the reckless behavior of the rich, and the cynical attitude of the poor. During exams, she would help her organize her notes and tell her not to cheat. When she did something wrong, Mary would give her a cold look. She would also patiently guide her behavior. She was like family, but when fame and wealth disappeared, she became so unfamiliar. She laughed and mocked, just like the others, and kicked her while she was down. Finally, she hung up the phone, which had lost its sound long ago. From the few clothes she had left, she threw away a scarf. Chapter 5. Faced with the constant stream of debt collection messages, Mom still dialed that number. She heard the familiar sounds of mixed laughter, men and women, on the other end first. Then came the familiar greeting, "Hello." In the past, when they spoke on the phone, she would always sweetly call him Jeremy. But now, all she could do was reply politely, "Jeremy, it's me." Her voice was slow and stiff. "Can you lend me some money?" There was more laughter on the other end, followed by the sound of fabric rustling. "Stop joking. Ha ha ha." The laughter faded back into the phone. "What did you say?" Just those words made Mom lose her courage to ask for money again. After all, things had been so tense between them. They had argued bitterly for their divorce. Since childhood, they had fought often, but never as fiercely as that time. The former Jeremy had once been like a scorching light to her. Although the light couldn't reach the depths of her soul, it at least brought a moment of warmth. She never expected that after signing the divorce agreement, the past would just remain the past. With no other choice, Mom had to go to her grandmother in the far south. Her grandmother was her biological mother. When Mom was 18, her grandmother divorced her husband. Years of torment had turned her hair white, and she had been on antidepressants for years. When Mom was little, her grandmother always stayed in one room by herself. She wouldn't go outside or speak, sometimes staring blankly at the white curtains. One time when Mom went to see her, she found her trying to swallow a white pill. The pills blocked her mouth. When Grandma saw Mom, she vomited, spilling the white pills all over the floor. The nanny heard the commotion and rushed in quickly. "Madam, you can't take too many of these pills. If you can't sleep, I can get you some warm milk. It might help you feel better." She stared blankly at the pills on the floor, shaking her head after a long pause. Mom walked over and held her hand. At that time, Little Mom didn't understand what depression was. Only that her mom was sick. Grandma seemed to not notice her presence, just staring blankly ahead. After that, she never opened that door again. She thought her mom was like a puppet, so boring. But sometimes, when walking past that door, she would stop and look inside. It was always silent, with no sign of life. One day, when she was an adult, that door, which had been shut for so long, finally opened. The pale figure was her mother, and the nanny was carrying her luggage. She left the house for good. When she left, she didn't even look at her. It was as if she had never been born from her. And now, the only person she could rely on was this mother she hadn't seen in so long. Her stepmother and father had left her for abroad after the bankruptcy. Mom spent all her money to buy a ticket for a green train. She had never taken a train like that before. The train was filled with luggage and garbage, making it impossible to even move. In the 4-seat compartment, there was only a small table big enough for 2 hands. She finally found a seat, but the seat covers were greasy. Sitting next to her was a fat man, and the whole space was filled with the smell of cigarette smoke. Mom sat down and her eyes reddened. Her white dress had already gotten dirty in several places. This was the only dress she had left. Everything else she could sell, she had sold. Chapter 6. I slept all the way, and woke up only when we arrived at my grandmother's house. As soon as I opened my eyes, I heard Grandma scolding Mom, from the moment you were born, all you knew was how to spend money. Ending up like this is just stupid. Mom cried while eating noodles. To afford the train ticket, she had been eating only 1 meal a day, as if each meal was meant to replace 3. But she never felt full. Grandma's hair was speckled with gray. Her eyebrows and eyes were faint, and her mouth scolded Mom. But her eyes couldn't hide the joy, nostalgia, and reproach. It was the look of a mother whose daughter had finally grown up and returned home. Grandma lived in a quiet little courtyard in Jiangnan. Where she lived well, the walls of the courtyard were covered with climbing roses. When the wind blew through the narrow alley, the flowers gently swayed. And in the courtyard, there was a stone table with a fluffy white cat lying on top, its body round and plump. On clear days, the cat would sleep beside the rose bushes. In her lifetime, Grandma never thought she would see her daughter again. Now, she could finally calm down and take a good look at her. Mom had been born with a silver spoon in her mouth, while at that time, Grandma had already been severely depressed. Between the ages of 1 and 5, they rarely met. When Mom turned 18, Grandma's illness finally improved. Grandma wanted to take her daughter away, but years of neglect had caused Mom to completely despise her. Due to neglect in raising her, Mom had always only known how to spend money since she was born. She had never really put in any effort. Even her degree was obtained by the family donating buildings. Not only did she like to spend money, but she also liked giving it away. Later, Mom didn't even think it was wrong to give away money. She said, "Anyway, I had so much money back then. What's wrong with giving some away?" Who would have thought that money would suddenly become negative? Mom thought that by relying on Grandma, her life would be carefree. But Grandma didn't pamper her. Except for the expenses for me, Grandma didn't give her anything else. As a result, Mom often fought with Grandma. She couldn't wear the nice clothes she used to, couldn't buy the expensive cosmetics she once had, and couldn't eat the expensive Western food she used to enjoy. "Mom, my underwear is torn. I need to buy new ones," Grandma said. "Buy it yourself." "Mom, I want to eat dessert from that shop," Grandma again said. "Buy it yourself." "Mom, there's a new lipstick shade. I want to buy the 203 color." Grandma still said, "Buy it yourself." Mom's face turned red with anger. Her once beautiful dyed hair had faded, and her curls no longer held their shape. She wore Grandma's old t-shirt. Before coming to Grandma's, Mom often cried, but now she didn't cry anymore. She was just angry, like a child who couldn't get the candy she wanted. At Grandma's house, Mom learned how to cook, and every day she followed Grandma to trim the branches in the garden, doing many household chores she had never done before. Sometimes, she would complain to me, saying, "Little Rose, your grandma has fallen for someone else. She doesn't like me anymore. She likes you now." Chapter 7. We spent a year here. During that year, it snowed in Jiangnan as well. I turned 1, grew a few little teeth, and smiled so much that it made Mom's heart bloom with joy. She often lifted me high up, and we would spin around in the rose bushes together. Grandma still loved sitting by the window, reading that thick novel she couldn't even lift. Occasionally, she would gaze out at the roses and daydream. The daily routine between mother and daughter was filled with bickering. Grandma scolded Mom for having no sense of spending. Mom complained that Grandma was old-fashioned. When I played in the living room, Grandma would read me storybooks. She would say, "In the end, the pigeon flew away. It decided to fly far away, to find a place that belonged to it." When Mom saw this, she would always sit with me, listening intently to Grandma's stories. Winter was a hard season for Grandma to endure. She always wore thick clothes, afraid of the cold. At first, she only coughed occasionally. Mom urged her to take medicine, but Grandma would say it was an old ailment, and medicine didn't help. Later, she had a high fever that wouldn't go away, and Mom stayed by her side day and night, taking care of her. Eventually, Grandma was admitted to the hospital. Outside the window, the flower bed was covered in a thick layer of snow. When Grandma was unconscious, Mom would stare out at the osmanthus tree. The cold snow would sometimes fall off the leaves, forming a small mound. I had never seen Mom with such an expression, pale as the snow outside. In the end, Grandma lay in a small box. She held the box and came to me, gently patting my head. With a hoarse voice, she said, "Little Rose, your mom doesn't have a mom anymore." That year, Mom shed many tears. Since Grandma passed away, Mom had to go out and find a job. She didn't know how to do anything. The one thing she was good at was how to dress herself. Originally, with her high education, she could have found a decent job. But once people saw her photo and name, they wouldn't hire her. They said Mom had done too many foolish things, and they didn't believe she could handle the job. Of course, the main reason was that they didn't want to offend Mom's ex-husband, my father. Mom would often say that Dad was a heartless man who had wasted so many years of her youth. Later, she stopped saying it, because there were too many things more important to her than the love Jeremy gave. For my medical expenses, Mom had no choice but to take up odd jobs. To avoid drawing attention to herself, she would purposely go out without makeup. Only then could she quietly get a job like an ordinary person. In the end, a flower shop agreed to hire her long-term. That was the craft Grandma had taught her that year. The flowers she wrapped were beautiful and elegant, and no matter how strange the customers' requests were, she could fulfill them one by one. This was the only thing she could do every day without getting tired of it. Our life seemed to suddenly settle down again. Mom would visit me at the hospital every day. She had no friends, and she didn't dare make any. In the year she went bankrupt, she had been met with scorn and mockery from these once friends. She would tell me many things, even though I didn't understand. Chapter 8. 1 month. She suddenly became very tired, and even brought back many leaves on her fuzzy coat. She said, "Little Rose, do you want to meet your dad?" Mom had often tried to make that phone call right after I was born, but she never went through with it. I was still angry with that bad man, so I turned my head to play with my fingers and ignored her. Mom babbled on to me for a long time. The next day, 2 people came to see me, a man and a woman. I had never seen my father since birth. When the man tried to touch me, I cried as hard as I could. The nurse hurried over, trying to comfort me, and the man was awkwardly pushed to the back. The nurse asked, "Are you a relative of the patient?" The man replied, "I'm her father." Seeing me cry so hard, the woman also tried to comfort me. I didn't like her. She smelled like my father. At that moment, Mom walked in, facing her ex-husband. She had no words. She simply picked me up skillfully, patted me gently, and whispered, "Good baby, don't cry." Dad stared at Mom, stunned. He had never seen her like this. Her hair was messy, dark circles under her eyes, her lips pale, looking unkempt but holding me gently, with no sign of embarrassment. He listened as she softly comforted me. He remembered how, when they were together, she had been the proud, carefree young lady who had never been afraid of anyone. At 15, she was notorious as the rebellious child. But when it came to a real child, she was helpless. She often said, "Children are the most terrifying creatures in the world." After I had fallen asleep, she sat down with a blank expression. She pulled out the custody agreement, which clearly stated the expenses Dad was responsible for. They sat there, facing each other so calmly. The times of arguments, though only a year and 2 months ago, seemed so distant. If you ever encounter any difficulties, you can come to me. His voice was unexpectedly loud, and he didn't dare look directly at Mom. He would only occasionally glance up. After saying this, the woman sitting next to him tugged at his sleeve. She looked just as beautiful as Mom, but her features were softer, lacking the sharpness. She was like a yellow daisy blooming in the corner of a wall, standing out among all the dullness. My dad, still the young master, wherever he went, his presence was undeniable, like a leading man with an aura around him. Mom didn't speak. The guilt of the leading man might bring some benefits, but she didn't want to be tied to this person anymore. When Grandma was on her deathbed, she told her, "Move forward." Since that moment, she made up her mind to listen to Grandma and move forward, to look ahead. Mom also sent a court notice to her good friend, Mary, requesting that she return all the items she had given to her before this year. All those past belongings were returned, and Mom sold them all, earning a substantial amount of money. Those former friends called her shameless for asking for things back that had been given away. But Mom didn't care. She said coolly, "If you're okay with receiving them, why should I feel ashamed asking for them back?" Chapter 9. Mom took the money she earned and continued working at the flower shop. My health gradually improved. She took great care of me. In the past, she was always bad at cooking. Every time the food was either burned or still raw, I always had stomach aches, and she carried digestive medicine in her bag all the time. Now, she could make 3 dishes and a soup. She learned that winter clothes go on sale in the summer. She learned that she could use health insurance when buying medicine at the hospital. These were all things Grandma had taught her. That year, she finally received the late motherly love that belonged to her. But as the evil female side character, even if she didn't provoke others, she couldn't live a peaceful life. Not long after, someone found out where Mom worked. They placed many orders at the shop, and after receiving the flowers, they left overwhelming negative reviews. At first, the shop manager thought it was just because there were too many orders, and Mom couldn't keep up. But in reality, every bouquet she sent out was carefully arranged. This continued for 5 days, and the negative reviews escalated. The boss showed Mom the screen of his phone, where there were several private messages. "If you don't fire Freya, I'll keep giving your shop negative reviews." The boss looked at Mom apologetically and said he had no choice but to fire her. This time, Mom didn't shed a single tear and calmly accepted everything. After she had put me to sleep, she sat in Grandma's usual spot for a while. In fact, this tactic had been used on her when she was still in college. Because of her outspoken nature and sharp appearance, she neither respected the elderly nor cared for the young. Anyone who upset her got slapped. There had always been rumors at school that she bullied classmates. They said, "I knew this kind of person was bad news just by looking at her face. She just looks like someone you don't want to mess with." She had never paid much attention to school gossip until one day when a group of people confronted her. "Did you slap these girls?" The girl being slapped in the crowd lowered her head, crying but unable to speak a complete sentence. Whenever anyone asked her something, she just kept crying. They pointed at the scar on someone's face, looking disgusted. "Did you slap them? I didn't believe the rumors that you were a bully, but turns out you really are one." Mom, who was always the proud young lady, immediately realized she had been framed by those vile people. She didn't explain herself. Instead, she grabbed the person who had been crying, pulled her to the side, and slapped her on the right cheek twice. "Never slapped you before? Well, now I'm making up for it." Now both sides of her face were swollen, looking like a pig's head, and she cried like one too. The crowd was furious, but they couldn't do anything to her. Later, the incident spread, and her image as the bullying girl became even more entrenched. Those who liked her even more, and those who disliked her hated her even more. Some local gang girls tried to recruit her, but she ignored them. One day, when she saw them bullying someone, she decided to challenge them. After a fight, her clothes were torn, but she grew more determined, targeting their weak spots. Nearby gang members were scared of her. Everyone both feared and despised her, but those who admired her worshipped her even more. Now, it was clear that she had been slandered again. Mom asked someone to check the IDs of these people. She deliberately brought a bouquet of flowers to apologize, and didn't forget to hire a bodyguard for herself. The people opened the door, confused. There stood Mom with her cold, beautiful face, holding a bouquet of flowers, her high heels clicking loudly. She looked like she was about to give someone a flying kick at any moment. Behind her was a 2-meter-tall muscular man. The unmistakable muscles clearly communicated the cost of malicious reviews. Mom sat down, bringing out the confident attitude she once had, and gently asked them what exactly they were dissatisfied with in the bouquets. The soft targets easily confessed. "Please don't hit me. I was just a hired blackmailer. I never bought your flowers." Finally, under Mom's smiling face, they revealed a name: Serafina. Chapter 10. As the evil female side character. The name Serafina had always been a taboo for my mother. My mother had never despised anyone as much as she did Serafina. As the female lead of the story, Serafina played the role of a stubborn, innocent flower. When they were younger, Serafina's tricks were crude, but as she grew older, my mother found it increasingly difficult to see through her. Back then, my mother had a bit of fame in the entertainment industry, having appeared on a few variety shows. To ride the wave of popularity, Serafina often clashed with my mom. Whatever Mom said, Serafina would argue against. Whatever Mom wore, Serafina would wear the same. If anyone criticized her, she would play the victim. The clueless viewers often thought that it was my mom bullying her. My mom was cyberbullied for quite a while. Eventually, it was Jeremy who provided the behind-the-scenes footage that led to her social death. The sudden downfall left her with no way out, so she had to go abroad to further her studies. Years later, she made a comeback, starring in several art films, and her shining roles helped redeem her reputation. She seemed to have calmed down, no longer provoking my mom, until later, when her resources grew better. My mom realized that Jeremy had invested a lot of money into her. They had been together long before. Serafina had played a very clever feign ignorance to trap him game. After returning to the country, she focused on acting, occasionally pretending to cause trouble, making Jeremy believe that she was about to stir up more drama. When Jeremy tried to discipline her, he realized it was all an illusion, and in fact, she was just a victim. He felt guilty for having wronged her, and then discovered how strong she was despite her difficult circumstances. She never gave up. This made him forget all his previous mistakes and, ultimately, he was deceived into falling for her. Compared to Freya's almost obsessive control, she was like a gentle breeze, soothing all his inner turmoil. But now, he discovered that all of this was a lie. He received anonymous photos of Serafina. These photos seemed to be telling him how foolish he had been. The happiness he had been chasing was just an illusion. He thought that by leaving Freya, he would find happiness. But instead, he had fallen into another abyss. The photos showed her with various men. From the moment they got together to even before that, she had been maintaining physical relationships with these men. She had been using his money to keep them. No wonder she always tried to find ways to make money and took every chance to take money from him. No wonder she kept saying she was busy with work and didn't want to spend time with him. He felt a wave of nausea, both mentally and physically. The door opened from the outside, and Serafina hurried over. "What's wrong? What's wrong? Are you feeling sick?" He looked up at her, noticing that the lipstick on her lips had smudged. Thinking it must have been from one of the men in the photos, he felt even more disgusted. He made himself so ill that he passed out. When he woke up again, the doctor walked over with the test results. He was told that he had contracted syphilis. The disease developed quickly, and within a few months, he was unable to even get out of bed. Serafina openly brought those men into his presence, flaunting her affairs right before him. The pain made it difficult for him to sleep, and every time he closed his eyes, he could hear someone crying. He walked over and saw that the person crying was 18-year-old Freya. She said, "Jeremy, how did you let yourself get to this point?" She walked over and hugged him. "Look at you. You have so many spots on your body. You said we would always be together as we grew up. But now you're dying. How can we be together?" In the dream, He also cried, not knowing whether it was for his impending death or for never being able to be with Freya again. Chapter 11. Jin's father and mother also saw the photos. Jin's father angrily said he would kill his useless son, but when he saw his son lying in bed covered in spots, at his old age, he could only kneel down in tears, pleading with the heavens to let his son live for a few more days. Jin's mother sat by the bed, crying uncontrollably. Look at you. You said Freya was so good, but you insisted on marrying that woman. Now look. She's gone, and you've caught this disease. His parents searched for medical help everywhere for his condition, but they couldn't control his illness. Meanwhile, Serafina had already left long before Jin's parents arrived. After Jeremy Jean died, his will stated that half of his inheritance should go to Mom. Jin's parents also sent Mom some money, claiming it was for my support. Mom used that money to pay off the debts she had accumulated. Then, not far from Grandma's little courtyard, she bought out a flower shop. In fact, it was Mom who had sent the photos. Grandma had kept an old phone in the drawer of her usual chair. The phone had only one number stored in it. Mom dialed the number, and on the other end was a private investigator. Even during her absence, Grandma kept a watchful eye on Mom. Grandma had prepared those photos for Mom long before. Mom looked at the photos, staring at Grandma's box, clearly feeling very sad. I tried to talk to Mom but could only make an awoo sound. Mom heard my babbling, wiped away her tears, walked over, and pulled me into her arms. It was April again, and after we paid tribute to Grandma, we sat in the yard, basking in the warm spring sun. After Grandma passed, the little fat cat had lost weight from the sadness, but luckily, it didn't remember much. Under Mom's care, it quickly regained its former shape. It loved to sleep in my little cradle. Mom often said it was also Grandma's baby. Mom dressed me in a little floral spring outfit. The spring breeze blew, and the little bough on my head swayed with the wind. Mom carefully held me, afraid that the wind might blow it off and I would cry. She had now learned not to solve problems with tears. The one who cried was now me. Mom's flower shop was modest, but enough to cover our daily expenses. The small town had a quaint charm, and there were many people coming and going every day. Mom also opened a small bed and breakfast in the yard. She made many new friends. Now, anyone who knew Mom said she was gentle, mature, and graceful. No one realized she was the same proud young lady who used to be on the front page of tabloids, known for passionately cursing people out. She didn't have the habit of sharing her sufferings with others. She wasn't without temper, but all that anger was hidden away. At the end of the year, Mom took me to a photography studio for a photo shoot. The solo and duo photos were placed alongside Grandma's. In the photo, Mom looked like the strong, leading lady, while I looked like a cartoon character. Together, we were the happy mother and daughter. Mom looked at the photo, her eyes reddening again. After a long pause, she lowered her head and said to me, "Thank you." I didn't understand, my eyes wide, staring up at her. Then, I tiptoed and wiped the tears off her cheek.